Welcome back to another episode of Sal and Pal's Go to the Movies. This is another Throwback Thursday review, and I'm here with my friend Touly. Say hi, Touly.
Hi, everyone.
And today we're going to be reviewing the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And just a fair warning, there's going to be spoilers up ahead, so you've been warned. In the Deep South, during the 1930s, 3 escaped convicts search for a hidden treasure while a relentless lawman pursues them. To begin my review, let's get the idea that this movie was loosely based on Homer's poem, The Odyssey, but I'm not going to get into that in my review, just letting you know in case you want to revisit the movie and find connections on your own. Okay, now on with my pros. First on my list, Roger Deakins is in this film as cinematographer, and as everybody knows, when Roger Deakins is in a movie, it's always a pro on my list. I really enjoyed the color palette of the film and the scenery that he brought to this movie project. The scenery were amazing, and also the tones that they use, it was very pleasing to the eye. Anything that Roger Deakins does, he does it really well, and you can see it from the way that he shoots from low to high and high to low and wide angles. I also enjoyed that this movie goes hand in hand with the soundtrack. The soundtrack was great. This is one soundtrack that went on to outsell the movie. Now, when you can say that about that soundtrack, that's something. Next, when you add the cast, like you always have in the Coen films, you have returning cast members such as John Turturro, who plays Pete, John Goodman, who plays Big Dan. Then you have newcomer George Clooney, who plays Ulysses Everett. Then we also have Tim Blake, who plays Delmar. And then we have a lot of supporting actors and actresses that you will find familiar. But that's the good thing about this movie, is that they don't steal the thunder from each other. They come together and add to the overall story instead of just diluting the story and stealing the thunder from each other. Now, onto the story. This can actually be borderline a pro and a con, because you can see it as a simple story that goes from point A to point B, the convicts escaping, going on the run, and then basically finding their way home. Or you can find another story in the film of a character study of George Clooney's character, Ulysses Everett, and how he went from being selfish to finding redemption. And that's the way I'm going to see this film. So I'm going to put the story as a pro. So this character, on his way, he started off by caring only for himself, even to the point of lying to Pete and Delmar about a treasure that never existed, just to get them to escape with him to go find his wife, who was going to get remarried. And by the end, he goes from being selfish to finding redemption and going to the point to even save Pete and young Tommy, the guitar player, from death. Now for my cons. I felt that there was too many what I call get out of jail free card in this movie. And what I mean by that is that they always had luck on their side, which would have been okay if it was a Three Stooges movie, but I would have liked it if it was just toned down a bit. My biggest con was the flood scene. It was even announced in the newspaper, and my biggest thing was, why didn't the cops know about it? Maybe just dress it up a bit, change the story a bit, or change the idea of it. Other than having them just be lucky and getting out of situations just in the nick of time, didn't really work for me, because they kept doing it over and over. If they just did it once or twice, it would have been okay. Or maybe use their wits, especially for George Clooney's character. He was fast talking and he could have probably used his wits. Also, this film gave me a Forrest Gump luck vibe, where they're always at the right place at the right time. Maybe have George Clooney's character really fall deep and then find himself alone and then find the light, which would even fit the theme to the soundtrack, like a gospel sort of idea. And after that, find redemption and find himself, and then go off and save his friends. And by that, find his wife and find his true happiness at the end of the movie. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to my friend Touly and see how he saw this film and what grade he gave this film.
So I do agree with some of the points that Sal made in terms of the story being quite simplistic, but containing all these satires, although some of the satire being overly exaggerated. Seeing the familiar actors in the film sort of portraying these roles in the sort of scenes they were in. Overall, it was okay. I would point out that there were like a couple of scenes that kind of took me aback when I saw it happen. For example, how they involved the cows and even the frog in the sense of how they went about concluding the frog's involvement in the movie. That's how I'm going to put it. But at least for my taste, I would have liked them to tone those aspects a little bit down, because when I saw it happen, I thought to myself, whoa, they actually went there and I was not expecting it, despite how overly exaggerated a lot of the scenes were in this film. And to kind of like piggyback on what Sal said about there being this sort of like get out of free jail card, sort of like this convenience that's always there to guide or help out our trio here, it did kind of rub on me in a sense, in that I wish the movie would have gotten to a point where maybe things didn't go their way, and that it kind of really circled back to George Clooney's character and how he would redeem himself, because I felt like the movie was a bunch of skits that was just put together with little transition in between, and because of that I felt kind of disconnected, like kind of disjointed. I was still able to follow along, but not being able to see what transpired from one scene to the next because they were already at the next location by the next scene. It didn't make me feel like there was this arc that I could follow as far as George Clooney's character is concerned and how he would go about his redemption story. It just felt like it got to the skit that, oh, this is where George Clooney is going to start feeling a little guilty about what he has been trying to do within deceiving his two fellow comrades, and now he wants to go and rescue these guys, versus there being this natural progression of seeing him feel guilty as he's misleading his friends and putting them into danger, and just letting me see on his face, as they're just having conversations alongside the road, then it leads to them discovering the next big thing that they want to encounter, versus, oh, here's a scene with them interacting with soon to be sirens, and because of that one of their comrades goes missing. And that scene sort of confused me in a sense, because like, why in particular did they choose that person for the ransom money? Like, why not take all three of them, but they chose Pete in particular? That scene sort of like didn't make sense to me. I think that's probably my biggest issue with this film, is that I didn't feel they were able to tie the scenes very well with one another, but because of how simple the story is, you were still able to follow. So it's a good thing and it's a bad thing at the same time. But for me, and I think this is something I speak to a high degree about when it comes to the movies we review, is how well are you able to tell your story as logical as you can, but make the transition as seamlessly. The technique they use, it's pretty common. It's a simple fade out, fade in, and I'm okay with that technique within your tool bag, but I felt like this movie relied on that too often, and then because of that, I felt the scenes were very disjointed. Was the movie entertaining? Overall, it was okay. Again, just given how things were like sort of blown out of proportion, and how the music, as Sal pointed, sort of like brought things together at the end. The onset of the film, when they produced their big hit, and then it kind of like, it circled around to what happened at the end. That was a nice little tidbit to give George Clooney some sort of way to get back on his wife's good side. Although, and I'm pretty sure this was intentional, the wife was being portrayed as being very selfish in a way too. That was the sense that I was getting, and that she was like very demanding of what George Clooney's character had to do in order to win her back, especially like with the ring, and even with her saying, oh, I didn't say specifically that was where the ring was, I said that it was around that area. So because of that, George Clooney ended up not getting the actual ring, and then she even went as far as to say, I want that actual ring, but that ring is now at the bottom of this flooded area. So I mean, like, she was being very demanding. Again, I felt like it was intentional to sort of like represent the sort of mindset that sort of a character would have. Again, maybe it just goes to show how far George Clooney's character would go now to sort of get his life back in order. In terms of looking at it in that perspective, it made sense. But I think given that the main story was not about the treasure or anything, but it was about getting George Clooney to become like a decent human being, how he treats people, I was hoping for a little bit more in terms of the sort of guiltiness that he would feel along the way, instead of him just all of a sudden realizing, oh shoot, I want to rescue these people because I've done them wrong. Even at the onset of the film, as the trio was running away from their captive site, there was this sense of uneasiness that George Clooney's character was feeling, but we as the audience don't know anything about it. But then as the movie progresses, we start to realize that maybe George Clooney is misleading his comrades, or that his comrades are starting to notice something about the way his character is behaving, and they're starting to question him. Like, I wanted that sort of a thing to sort of build up to what George Clooney would do, versus him just realizing that something bad has happened and now he has to do something about it, versus him starting to feel conflicted about, should I even bother going back to stop this marriage from happening because I'm putting other people's lives in danger. But he still felt very determined, even after rescuing these friends. I wanted that sort of a moment where he was put in a fork in a road and had to sort of decide which road to take. And then if the movie wants to intervene, as this movie was doing quite often in terms of its conveniences, or as Sal's put it, the get out of free jail card, then so be it. But I wanted that moment with George Clooney's character. I didn't feel that it was present in this film. Overall, the film itself, I think I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10. It did had its flaws, but in terms of like the sort of satire and it being blown out of proportion, and I guess it was sort of the way the movie was shown, like I said, in this sort of skit sort of way, that maybe it kept me engaged because of the diversity of experiences that these characters went through.
Yes, so I see it the same way you did. The whole movie was simplistic, easy to follow, but I still wanted a little more. There was that development of the character going from one selfish, egoistic person to the end where he was like changing. I want to say he was not fully changed, but still he was on the way to change. But it didn't give me that transition that I wanted, or enough situations where I saw that he was doing it. And then the other characters did not really pry into like, why are you doing this, or what's motivating you from going to here to there. So this movie left me wanting more. That's what I want to say. And for me, it's going to receive a 6.5 out of 10, mostly because the soundtrack. I really enjoy the soundtrack. It got me into the movie. The cast, I like the cast, so that pulled me deeper into the movie. The story is the only thing that I would say just to work on a little more, but overall, yes, 6.5 out of 10. So that's my final grade. So that does it for this review of Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Please join us next time where we're going to review The Great Escape from 1963.
You are the first American officer I've met. Hills, isn't it?
Captain Hills, actually.
17 escape attempts.
18, sir.
Tunnelman, engineer.
Flyer.
I suppose what's called in the American Army a hotshot pilot.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can find our social media links below. And like always, keep watching movies.